Yeonmi Park is a prominent North Korean defector. She rose to fame after her harrowing tales of living in the oppressive and secretive country of North Korea. Her stories have touched millions of hearts. She saw death on the streets, she starved, she watched her father die in front of her, and she braved the cold and the terrain at only 13 years old. You want to find the truth, you gotta follow the money. Yeonmi's first-hand accounts have given us a glimpse into the so-called hermit kingdom.
He was begging for food while his organs were hanging out of his body.
Yeah. And
her accounts are only a small window into one single woman's experience in a country of almost 25 million. Her accounts, however, are so inherently valuable due to the secretive and propaganda-ridden machine of the North Korean regime. The same fact that makes her testimony so valuable is the same fact that makes her testimony extremely hard to verify. She's quite aware of this. However, over the years, she has taken to stage after stage, televisions, book deals, and podcast appearances, recounting her experiences and her stories and her warnings. Now, to question her honesty feels really cruel. To pick apart her accounts with a fine-tooth comb, I think would be majorly unfair. So I don't plan to do that. However, this is a deep dive investigation into Yeonmi Park.
그러니까 그 부분을 잘 살리게 되면 굉장히 스타가 될 수 있겠다.
Yeonmi Park has found celebrity.
Her speeches have been viewed over 1 billion times online. She's written 2 books about her escape and is extremely outspoken about the North Korean regime.
that I should never give up. Now, I live in the United States as a free person. Anything is possible. Now this person thinks their oppression is somehow their pronouns.
Crazy,
yes.
Right? I mean, I think it's amazing you could overcome what you overcome and have this type of logic.
The same tactic that North Korean regime used to divide people is being used in America. Being white is not a crime.
Who emails me, the teacher saying how they do fantastic job teaching him about equity. What a loads of isn't it?
My main question, and the one that I posed for this video, is why her message has changed so drastically. Understanding where she's coming from is equally important whether you agree with her or you don't. So you'll see what I mean as we go. I feel I have good reason to be suspicious of anyone who moves to a country and engages in behavior that divides its citizens and makes them hate each other. We're going to look at Yeonmi Park in depth. To understand Yeonmi, we need to look at her circle, her rise to fame, her connections. To put it plainly, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to analyze Yeonmi Park from a psychological perspective and a journalistic perspective in the context of her circumstances, her cultural background, yada yada yada. And second, we're going to follow the money. My goal here that I've stayed absolutely steadfast on is not to discredit Yeonmi Park. It's to find out what's going on, whatever the hell it is. And whatever that is, I'm going to tell you guys what I find. You can draw your own conclusions. Don't you love when people say that? Now, when she's speaking, and as we watch her speaking, I've read all her books, I've watched a lot of her talks, I've done a lot of research for this video, but there's a few things we should notice and then remember going forward. For one, she does have a tendency to misspeak, especially saying an incorrect date by accident. For instance, here you can see, obviously she knows the correct date. She said it earlier, she knows the correct date, but she does accidentally say the wrong date, things like this.
Kim Il-sung was passed away 2004, and I was born in 1993. He was died after I was born 1 year later, so...
Because she has been known to say the wrong thing, even when she doesn't mean it. Next, English is not her first language, and she learned it quite recently, and therefore there is some translation issues, some wording issues, and communication gaps. Next, she's been through extremely difficult circumstances while extremely young and has been likely traumatized, and she's the victim of many atrocities which can make your memories have inconsistencies or gaps. Trauma is a major factor here we have to consider. She could be a victim of manipulation, she could have had to agree to terms of assistance in seeking freedom or assistance in escaping, and this could be a factor in her later career path. This might not really be her fault. Next is that she was raised in a regime that brainwashed her, and it's likely that she was extremely trusting of anyone who offered her help, even if that help was conditional. Her entire childhood, she was taught to never think for herself. How that truly affects her perception, we don't know. So to be quite frank, Yeonmi Park has a lot of money. Her net worth right now is around $5 million. She charges roughly $13,000 to speak at any given event, and she's rich as heck, okay? That gives us roughly $5 million to track and find out where exactly her message changed and why.
Yeonmi Park.
You know Yeonmi Park?
No, I don't.
The North Korean defector who got the huge tits, who was on Rogan, that ate rap.
And maybe who held her hand through her changing sentiments.
Now I'm sitting in Manhattan, Columbia University. Heartbreaking to see that this wonderful country is being destroyed by these people who are so misled, so blind.
So let's begin at the beginning. Yeonmi Park was born in October of 1993 in Haesan, North Korea. She was born prematurely, only weighing 3 pounds, and began her fight for life the moment she took her first breath. She was welcomed into her family, consisting of her mother, her father, and her sister. Her sister, Yumi, was 2 years older than Yanmi and delighted to have a new little sister. Haesan, North Korea borders China on its northern edge. This means that across the invisible lines dividing the two countries, Yeonmi could see the Chinese children freely playing. She could smell the fresh food being cooked and served more meters away and dreamed to experience the life right outside her grasp. In order to understand Yeonmi's childhood, we need to know a little bit about North Korea. And considering it's likely not on your top 10 vacations, and you've probably never been there, here's the context and historical background where Yeonmi's story takes place. Yeonmi's first year of life was also the first year of the Great North Korean Famine, or what was called Arduous March, or March of Suffering. The remainder of the 90s would mark a period of mass starvation and economic crisis. The effects of the dwindled food supply hit the poor the hardest, but even the wealthy felt its effects. Families and children were starving to death, freezing to death, or both. Death toll climbed over the years, peaking in 97, amounting to about 500,000 people dying from starvation, and other sources put that number above 1 million. So the people's desperation was palpable. The loss of life was unfathomable. This led to a huge increase in the number of defectors, people escaping North Korea to avoid starving to death. Understandably. Even so, in an effort to prevent the world from finding out about the dystopian blend of starvation and desperation in the country, words like famine and hunger were strictly banned. I apologize for my pronunciation, but there was a group called Simwajo or something. I will put the word. But this was a group that was created to track down and purge any citizens who verbalized the state of the country at the time, or the cause of their loved one's death being starvation. Reason being, if you spoke of the famine, you spoke of a government failure, something the North Korean government will go to absolutely any length to prevent you from doing. They will preserve their image, that of a successful, prosperous, well-oiled war machine. They ensure no citizen could ever expose the world to the truth of the North Korean government, that it's a heavy-handed, disorganized regime incapable of even feeding its own population. The death toll for children during Arduous March was around 93 for every 1,000. That's about 9.3%, which is shocking. And it was equally as shocking for the North Korean people, who had been kept in the dark and now forced into silence through terror or death. The famine saw the rise of a new generation called the Black Market Generation. The basic needs of the North Korean people, such as those in Haesan, like Yanmi, turned to black markets called Jamadang, I believe. These markets were small and discreet, but without a working food distribution system, people needed these local markets to be able to make any sort of money. Sellers would offer things like foreign media, food, batteries, rice cookers, electric shavers, dress shoes, cosmetics, DVD players, VCRs, motorcycles, vinyl floor coverings, you name it. They even offered medical treatment from retired doctors in these black markets. So we say black markets, you think like Silk Road. Don't. It's not really like that. It's more like a flea market, right? Except it was as illegal as the Silk Road in North Korea. A lot of North Korean people's incomes came from these market activities. Getting around the government via irregulation business or by maybe bribing officials could allow you to kind of prosper a little bit in the market. Yeonmi's father began his business venture in 1998, trading from Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, to Haesan, where they lived. Now, Pyongyang is located on the Taedong River, about 109 kilometers upstream from the Yellow Sea. It is the political and industrial and transport center of North Korea. Here you'll find all the major government institutions as well as the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, which has its headquarters in this so-called Forbidden City. Pyongyang is North Korea's industrial center. You can't just go there though. I mean, obviously, we can't go, but I mean, most North Koreans can't even go. You must get special permission to visit the capital city. You have to have a certain status. This is a place that's so secretive in its reality, yet so prominent in its descriptions of rich history and bronze and marble adorations. So North Korea has what's called songbun status. Now, based on political, social, and economic backgrounds of one's direct ancestors, as well as the behavior of your relatives, songbun is used to classify North Korean citizens into 3 primary castes: core, wavering, or hostile, in addition to approximately 50 sub-classifications as well. So effectively, your songbun status is a decisive factor in your quality of life, your employment, your education, your opportunities, punishments, you name it. So it's not decided on your own merit or anything, it's actually based all on your family. A low songbun status can result from committing a crime or speaking out against the government, and your low status will haunt your family for generations. Your low status will lower all of their statuses for generations afterwards. To be a member of the so-called hostile class could be the result of your uncle committing a crime, and such status may very well mean you and everyone you love starve to death. The regime's ruling practices offer absolutely no leeway to the citizens. It's their way of strict control, and it's essential for the government to keep its population starving and afraid, yet grateful and thankful. Talk about sins of the father, right?
The Kims rule over a police state that relies on heavy surveillance.
These are intelligent people that have managed to control a country for 3 generations.
Now, you cannot freely travel within North Korea, even as a citizen, much less out of North Korea. The key to control for the ruling government is that no one leaves. No one is allowed outside the borders, reason being it would enlighten them to the fact that their suffering is unique. It would obliterate the picture of the outside world that the regime has painted, to instill fear and horror into the people who may otherwise consider seeking freedom. Leaving North Korea without explicit permission or bribed assistance would mean execution.
Sister still in North Korea. That's why I was worried about speaking in a public place like this. But unfortunately, my sister got tortured by the government because of our escape.
At best, if you survive, you'll spend the rest of your life performing backbreaking labor inside a labor camp. You'll become a ghost, as everyone you love will also be imprisoned or killed, and you'll have no one left to fight for you anyway. That's the reason they do this. So, alone, you will suffer as you're made into an example for your friends, your neighbors, and your community. As they see the death and torture your family endures as a result of your attempted defection, they'll know to never attempt to leave, lest they end up riddled with bullets too. Defecting from North Korea is a last resort. It's like a last-ditch effort for survival. Defectors are usually left with 2 choices: defection or death. Yeonmi's family was in the same situation, though they didn't start there. For a long time before Yeonmi was born, and since she was born, her family was actually quite wealthy by North Korean standards. They had high songbun status, and so her paternal grandfather was a former civil servant in the Japanese occupation, giving him an extremely high songbun status after serving as a military officer in the Korean War. And this songbun status, this high status, was passed down in Yeonmi's family. This was before she was born. So, unfortunately, that all went to hell in 1980 when Yeonmi's uncle was convicted of R-word and attempted murder of his wife. Now, he was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor and later imprisoned. We don't know whether these charges were true or not, but it was only because of the grandfather's connections that her uncle wasn't executed. So, lucky duck. Her father realized that he would have no future unless he found a way to join the Workers' Party of Korea because the uncle's lowered songbun status had echoed through the family. He decided to become a laborer at a local metal foundry so that he could work to prove his loyalties to the regime and hopefully regain his status. He was able to build good relationships with the people who had power, including the party representative there. Eventually, he actually secured his membership.
Party of North Korea is a huge privilege, but most of North Koreans are not so lucky.
Haesun had a long-established tradition of cross-border trade with China and a small but lively black market for basically everything. Yeonmi's father joined a small class of black market operators who found a way to exploit little cracks in their state-controlled economy. He started off small, smuggling in and selling cigarettes. He could bribe officials with the cigarettes, and then they would look the other way, they'd let him go, and eventually he started selling clothes as well. Her father's business ventures got riskier as he began selling precious metals. He had a connection in Pyongyang who could get him some valuable metals like gold, silver, copper, nickel, cobalt, and then he could go sell these to the Chinese and make a profit. Yeah, her mother was vehemently against this idea at first, warning that her father would absolutely be executed immediately if he were caught. He had to have a plan. If he wanted to survive this, he had to have a plan. So this plan all came down to what's called train number 9. These number 9 trains were exclusively for the use of the dictator to bring him specialty foods and fruits and precious materials from different parts of North Korea. Everything that was shipped in these cars were in wooden crates so that even the police weren't able to open or inspect them. Yeonmi's father knew somebody who worked on the train, and that man agreed to help him smuggle metals from Pyongyang to Haesan in one of their safe compartments. This is when her mother finally got on board with the dad's plan. Between 1998 and 2002, her father spent the majority of those 4 years in the capital of Pyongyang running his business. He would be gone for about 9 months out of the year and would return briefly for visits to Haesan to see his family, but that was about it. And then he would ride the train back with his shipment of metal. Meanwhile, for these years that her father was gone, her mother had taken over running the business in Haesan, their local black market business. So she would pick up packages from the train and then deliver them to smugglers who would then go and sell them in China. Right? At that time, they had food to eat. They could afford new clothes. They could afford shoes for school, brand new shoes. They would have meals with local officials. I mean, they were doing pretty well, considering, at least by North Korean standards, again. While foreign media was strictly banned and the punishment, if you're caught, was extremely severe, her uncle had a VCR. Yanmi would be able to watch Hollywood movies as her aunt covered all the windows and swore them to secrecy. Yeonmi talks about how she loves Cinderella, Snow White, and James Bond movies.
I had so much fun playing with my friends. Like go riverside and hiking and like swimming. Or sometimes I could even play Super Mario game at our friends' houses. You guys know what is a Super Mario game, right? I'm still looking for that mushroom to getting me bigger, taller.
When she was 8 years old, also, her dream of visiting the capital of Pyongyang came true. Only the most privileged citizens are allowed to live or work in the nation's capital.
So my sister and I had to move back a lot between Pyongyang and Haesan because he lived in Pyongyang from 1998.
Her visit to Pyongyang was full of wonder and firsts. Her first time riding on a public bus, seeing the subway, seeing private cars. She'd never so much as seen a taxi before. She compared the city to a fairyland. Everyone was well dressed and clean. Women were ordered to wear skirts and followed the dress code set by the leader. She recalled that in Haesan, a lot of women actually ignored this dress code and they'd opt for slacks or like more practical clothes, but not here. Here it was fancy. Here they kept up all appearances. Pyongyang is like a simulation. It's like a bubble of a perfectly crafted utopia that stands out like a sore thumb in the dark and rubble of the rest of the country. There were neon signs hung on restaurants, downtown streets illuminated, glowing banners, and 100-story hotels. High-rise apartments, working electricity, fountains, plazas, and a massive, massive bronze statue of Kim Sung, smiling down on it all, like a god looking down at his little ant farm. Yeonmi remembers laying flowers at the feet of the statue, her father joking that it would be cool to take off his jacket and sell it to China, or at least one of his shoes. This talk could get him killed, and Yeonmi later compared her father to Winston Smith in George Orwell's 1984 for his ability to see straight through the propaganda, right? He was critical of the regime, and you can't bullshit a bullshitter, as they say.
When I was 7, I was really busy working with my homework from school. And my father just told me that as long as you know how to count the monies, you don't have to learn all these things.
His mother spoke of a day when her husband pointed to the portraits of Kim hanging on their wall and said, "Our struggles are caused by these men." A bit later on, the Parks were on a show, which we'll discuss later, and there was other North Korean defectors on this show, and they were asked if they'd classify Yeonmi Park's family as rich, and the woman that was asked answered, yes, that's right. Yeonmi also said that she had zero interest in learning about the Kims in school. She was having too much fun with her friends, hiking, swimming, going to the riverside, and playing Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, I thought about it, and then learning about Kims, it was not anything like useful and practical thing at all. So I quit. I didn't really study after that. So
these years of her life, she and her family were living extremely well by North Korean standards. Not by Western standards, but by North Korean standards, absolutely. But 2002 was not all rainbows and sunshine. At a mere 9 years old, she said she saw her best friend's mother executed in a stadium in Haesan for simply watching a Hollywood movie.
When I was 9 years old, I saw my friend's mother publicly executed. Her crime, watching a Hollywood movie.
This is one major contention point in Yeonmi's account. Several North Korean defectors from Haesan. Public executions only ever took place on the outskirts of the city, mostly at the airport, never in a stadium or in the streets, and the last one that any of them can remember was a mass execution of 10 or 11 people that happened in 1999. So a lot of this comes from a 2014 article in The Diplomat that was the first to call attention to Yeonmi's discrepancies. The account of this friend's crime, whatever she was supposedly executed for, changes constantly, a lot. Okay? In Europe, she claimed the woman was executed for watching a James Bond movie, and sometimes, less specifically, just a Hollywood movie. But in Hong Kong, she told an audience that the woman had been caught watching South Korean DVDs. However, I don't know if you remember, but she also mentioned watching James Bond movies for herself. There's also an expert on North Korea who expressed extreme skepticism about this execution for watching Western movies. It wasn't until 2003, though, that everything began to fall apart. Her father got caught illegally trading in Pyongyang, and his conviction meant that the other family members were also criminals now, and their position in society plummeted. He was sentenced to a daunting 17 years in prison. This is another point of contention. From this point on, the story gets really muddy. Just forewarning you. So take everything I say from this point on in this story with a grain of salt, because we will come back to pretty much all of it later on. So because she had worked in her husband's trading business, Yeonmi's mother faced interrogations on and off for about a year, sometimes at home in Haesan and sometimes elsewhere. Her mother never claimed to have been to prison. However, Yeonmi claimed that her mother was in prison for 6 months because she had simply returned to her hometown. So, with both her parents imprisoned, Yeonmi being 9 years old and her sister Eunmi being 11, the girls were left to fend for themselves. They couldn't go to school anymore and would only venture as far as the riverside to wash and to the mountain to eat grass. In a BBC radio interview, Yeonmi claimed that her sister went to live at her uncle's house and she went to live at her aunt's house in the countryside for 3 years. She told of how while she was there, she ate wild food like grass or sometimes dragonflies, just anything she could find at the time. This does conflict with her account of her and her sister fending for themselves alone, but when asked by the reporter, were there any adults that knew you were alone? She answered, no, people were dying there, they don't care. I saw lots of dead bodies on the street and nobody takes care of anybody. This makes sense considering the nature of North Korea. It gets even messier though once again. Yeonmi and her mother starred on a South Korean TV show called Now on My Way to Meet You. The host of this show asked Park's mother, when we talk about stories of people eating grass or people struggling to eat, she said, oh, that never happened. Why is that? Did Yeonmi never go through these experiences? And her mother replied, we were not to that extent. As in, we were not that bad off. We weren't that poor. Like, there were people who were going through that, but we were not that. And we were never in a position where we were starving.
북에서 풀 뜯어 먹던 얘기, 먹고 살기 어려운 얘기하면 예주양이 저런 거 없는데? 이런 경우가 좀 있었어요.
네.
왜 그랬죠, 예주양은 어렸을 때? 그런 걸 못 겪었나요?
근데 그 정도는 아니었고 굶지는 않았어요. 굶지는 않고 이와 같이 너네 무슨 밥을 먹니 하면 이 밥 먹는다, 옥수수 밥을 먹는다는 몰랐어요. 그저 쌀밥은 그저 당연히 밥이겠거니 하는 정도로는 살았어요. 예. 애 아빠가 엄청 열심히 살았어요. 엄청 열심히 살면서 자식을 먹여 살림에 남부럽지 않게 키우려고 하다 보니까.
Meanwhile, her entire memoir accounts of her starving.
Father and I am looking for the food at home. And somehow, I'm back in North Korean home. Every corner we search, there's no food. And I know so well.
All we are thinking every single second is, I'm hungry. I'm hungry. How do I eat? My grandmother died from malnutrition. My uncle died from starvation. Being in North Korea, of course, only way for me to get my proteins were eating, grasshoppers, dragonflies, a lot of insects, tree barks, plants, flowers, and that's how we survive. And most of people die in the spring.
It's possible the conditioning and indoctrination of the regime has led her mother to be extremely fearful of being honest about their situation, but it's also possible that since this is one of the earliest accounts, and this was before Yeonmi was famous at all or had done any speaking engagements, it might be more true than not true. Park's mother goes on to say, so when Yeonmi started working for this program, I think she became more aware of the situation in North Korea. The host then responds, it sounded like Yeonmi learned heaps on this program. And her mother said, she calls me before and after a show recording me, asking me, am I really North Korean? She says she has no idea what the other girls on the show are talking about. She says she thinks everyone is lying on the show.
방송에 출연하면서 우리 예주가 북한의 실태를 더 잘 알게 된 계기라고 생각해요.
그 예주양은 여기 와서 배운 것 같아요.
네,
그러니까
자기가 어떤 때는 엄마한테 전화를 해요. 이 방송을 녹화를 하고 엄마 내가 진짜 북한 아이가 옳긴 옳은가. 다른 언니들이 하는 말이 무슨 말인지 자기는 전혀 모르겠대요. 자꾸 거짓말을 한다는 거예요.
그러니까
네.
처음에 와서 그러더라고요.
네. 그래 제가 방송을 후에 모니터를 해보면 다 진짜 말이 맞거든요.
네.
네.
이게 그런 거잖아요. 그러니까 여러 가지 정치적 상황 때문에 북을 떠나신 분들도 있지만 사실은 대부분은 그러니까 한국어자도 아니고 일단 밥이나 좀.
So when I was escaping from North Korea, I did not escape for freedom. I was escaping for a bowl of rice.
먹었으면 굶어 죽지나 말아야지 하고 넘어온 분들 참 많잖아요.
저도 북한 사람들 모인 데 가서는 말을 많이 조심을 해요. 네, 잘못 말하면 북한 사람들이 많이 격분해 하더라고요. 네. 제가 우리 딸 보고도 방송에 나가서 내가 할 말이 아닐 땐 크게 말을 하지 말라고 해요.
말하지 못하게 해요, 아예. 네? 철없이 보인다고, 그러다 괜히 미움께 산다고 언니들 앞에서 이상한 소리 하지 말고 그냥 수긍만 해라, 너는. I had escaped at 13 because I was starving.
The reason I believe that is because I do believe she lived in North Korea. However, I believe she experienced quite a privileged life in North Korea for a large amount of time. And there were others who did not. We'll see though, we don't know. It's an obvious point of contention what these years between 2003 and 2004 actually consisted of, whether she was truly starving and eating grass to try to survive or whether she wasn't. Her mother at this point decided to sell their home in Haesun and dropped Yeonmi and Yumi off to stay with their uncle and an old friend of their father's named Min-sik. He lived with his wife and 2 sons, working as a driver for a collective car service. Even so, his wages were so little that he really couldn't afford to feed any more children, much less he could hardly afford to feed his own children. So thankfully, Yeonmi's mother was able to give him money from the sale of their house. This didn't last very long at all, and they quickly ran through this money. And then one of Yeonmi's other aunts, a different one, came over to the house. Does that make sense? This aunt saw how badly they were struggling and decided to take Yeonmi home with her to live in her village, which was very deep in the countryside, a small village called Songnam-ri. Yumi stayed behind, but Yeonmi's aunt was married to a retired government official and all their children were grown, so they could afford to take Yeonmi in. In that area, electricity was super rare. They never relied on it. Like the Amish, it just wasn't a part of life for them that they relied on. It was a luxury when it was on and they would utilize it, but for the most part, they lived without it. They didn't need it. They lived as if it would never come back on. Yeonmi said of this, I had to work washing dishes, hauling wood from the forest, but I didn't mind it all. Besides, I wasn't weak from hunger anymore. In fact, I had starved for so long that I couldn't stop eating. I was like a baby bird. Whenever I opened my eyes, my mouth would open at the same time. Whenever I closed my eyes, my mouth closed too. My aunt cooked good and simple food for me. Dishes made from corn and potatoes and pepper plants that she grew in her garden. She also grew sweet potatoes to sell in the market, but we would keep the leaves for ourselves to eat. The pigs would eat what we left on our plates and the scraps from our food. The house also had a vineyard around it, and I tasted grapes for the first time. It was like heaven. I recovered very quickly and gained back all the weight I had lost, and I started to grow. Yeonmi's aunt's grown daughter, who would be Yeonmi's cousin, was a doctor, and she was married to a policeman, and the policeman, he would bring home like videos and stuff that he'd confiscated in raids, and he'd let Yeonmi watched those films. Her cousin often took her into the mountains to search for plants, tree barks, and nuts to use for different treatments. She would follow her cousin around like a happy puppy, learning what is useful, what is edible, and what is poisonous. She said, the year I spent in the countryside gave me a safe place to rest and heal, but it was not my fate to stay there forever. One day in early 2004, my mother visited with some terrible news. Her father had been convicted in a secret trial and sentenced to hard labor at a felony-level prison camp. They heard it was 17 years, but later this was changed to 10 years. Not that it mattered, but that's still an unbelievably long time, considering how few people survived in prison for long at all. They were places where you're no longer considered a human being. They've said prisoners in these camps can't even look directly at the guards because an animal cannot look a human in the face. And their days are spent performing back-breaking labor with only the thinnest porridge to eat, so they are weak and they're hungry and they're tired and lonely and scared. At night, the prisoners are crammed into these very small cells and forced to sleep like packed fish, like sardines, head to toe. Only the strongest live long enough to survive their sentence. So in the wake of this news, Yeonmi's mom took her back to Kwon, back to her uncle's house where Yeonmi was, and promised to earn enough to support the three of them, if the uncle would just allow them to stay. Her mother, and her sister moved into a small room with a very tiny bed. However, they all ended up sleeping together on the floor. They lived here for the next 2 years. At 10 years old, Yeonmi's mom enrolled her in middle school. See, she'd skipped the last 2 years of elementary school, and the schools in Kwon were much harder than the schools she had attended before in Haesan, and so she was kind of tossed headfirst into coursework that she was struggling to make any sense of. In North Korea, school children do a lot more than just studying. They're part of an unpaid labor force. Classy. Meanwhile, her mother jumped from job to job. She did facial massages, she did eyebrow tattoos for women, she bought and sold video cassettes and televisions on the black market, but once again the children were running to the countryside to look for plants and insects that they could eat. She would raise rabbits, which they would later eat as well. Each child in school was required to bring 5 rabbit pellets each year, which would be used for soldiers' winter uniforms. Yeonmi said, "It's difficult to tan your own rabbit leather, and the military has high standards, so the school would often reject the bad ones. The only way you could be sure you'd fill your quota was to buy expertly tanned skins in the jamadang, or the market. Of course, the school administrators didn't give all the rabbit furs to the military. They kept them for themselves to make some money, and I know this because my mother had a business buying and selling rabbit furs. In fact, sometimes she would buy pelts from the school that she had just sold to customers looking to fill their quotas. The insane system was good for my mother, but extremely hard on everybody else." Take note of that sentence. By the time she was 11, Yeonmi was helping in the markets. She would sell persimmons, and at the end of the day having enough money to pay her mother back and buy some candy and some bottles to bribe the guards. Her mother stopped them from this because they were wearing out their shoes from walking so much. She said, "Still, I learned something important from my short time as a market vendor. Once you start trading for yourself, you start thinking for yourself." Fall of 2005. Yeonmi's mother is forced into hiding. The Kwon police are looking for her. Why? Well, see, in North Korea, you can't just move. You must get government permission to move outside of your assigned district, and that's extremely hard to get. You can move only with a really big reason, like a new job, a marriage, or a divorce. Since her mother was still officially a resident of Haesan, she had technically illegally changed her residence to Kwon when she moved. The police waited patiently for a long time for her to come bribe them, but since she didn't, they finally decided to send her to a re-education camp for punishment. When she found out the police were looking for her, the mother ran away to stay with some friends, and this is why she was not home on the sunny afternoon when Yeonmi's father showed back up at the door. Once Eunmi got back from school, they sent word to the mother that he was home, and it turns out he had been able to bribe the warden to let him out on medical leave. He had been diagnosed with colon cancer, and this left the family with one option: to escape.
저희 아빠가 그러시더라고요. 너희는 이제는 북한에서 희망이 없다. 너희 희망을 찾으려면 아무래도 나가야 되겠다고. 중국으로 가야 되겠다. 그래서 저희는 중국을 택했고.
So you heard here how Eunmi said that it was the father's idea to escape, and he's the one that told them to escape. But you're about to hear where Yeonmi claims that it was her idea to escape and that they didn't even tell the father they were escaping.
I told my mom, like, come with me to China. And if my father knew that we were escaping, he's gonna be punished so much. So it's better off that he does not know that we were escaping. So if he actually knew that we were escaping, it wouldn't good for him. He would be dead. So I told him, I'm like, you cannot tell father that we are escaping.
Prior, Eunmi had contacted a broker, and she actually left in the middle of the night without telling anyone, so she was already gone.
그 브로커를 제가 찾았고 제가 먼저 나왔고.
My sister who escaped left me a note saying, go find this lady, she's gonna help you to escape.
Yeonmi's father decided to stay behind, and Yeonmi would go alone with her mother.
So I found the lady, and she bribed the guards on the border. I took my mother with me. I told her to come with me to China. So I crossed this with one young man, and my mother and myself, 3 of us crossed the frozen river into China.
Why did you not bring him with you?
Because he's a man and he was sick. And somehow she said only women can go.
Other accounts claim that Yeonmi, her father, and her mother went together.
Desperate to find her sister, Yeonmi and her parents walked across the mountains to the border, where they bribed guards to cross the Tumen River.
See, China's on good terms with North Korea, and they will return defectors if they're caught. So they were far from safe in China. One smuggler told them that he would turn them into Chinese authorities unless he could have sex with, was again only 13 years old at the time, which is disgusting. Her mother offers herself up instead, and this is so sad. Yeonmi watched her mother get our word.
Today, I escaped North Korea. I saw my mother. The rapist was a Chinese broker. He targeted me. I was 13 years old.
Yeonmi's father did eventually manage to join them in China, and the family decided never to return to North Korea. The horrible conditions, however, in China that they were facing were extremely hard on Yeonmi's father, who succumbed to his cancer and passed away.
So, as a North Korean defector, there is no way to, even comfortably die, right? No, funeral too, so.
Yeonmi and her mother bribed a crematorium to burn his body at night to avoid getting caught by Chinese authorities. They'd bury his ashes on the mountainside.
My father died, and I had to bury his ashes in the middle of my mountain, and I was 14 years old at that time.
This is another point of contention.
한두 사람 이렇게 돈을 주고 우리가 샀어요. 그 사람들이 가서 멀리 올라가서 그 연미가 그때는 우리 큰 딸을 찾지 못했으니까 연미가 아버지에게 시신을 안고
And then at 3 a.m. we had to move his body. Everybody's sleeping, so and then I buried him on the midnight. By myself.
Knowing they needed out of China, they took a multi-day bus trip where they ended up at a shelter run by South Korean and Chinese missionaries.
And then we met another North Korean defector woman, and she says, "Oh, you know what? There are missionaries. Is gonna help us to escape if we become Christians." And I'm like, "What the heck is missionaries?" I never even knew the word religion, right? Kim's a religion. And then she's like, "Oh, there's people who believe in God and Jesus. They're gonna help us." And in that missionary shelter, I proved out my faith to them. And that's how I became free.
Together, they trekked into the Gobi Desert, crossed into Mongolia. At the border, they were stopped by Mongolian guards who said they would be forced to return to China. So they swore to the guards that they would take their own lives and cut themselves with razor blades if they did not let them through. So the guards took them both into custody, but they were eventually sent to a detention center in the Mongolian capital of Ulaanbaatar. Weeks later, they were met by South Korean officials who managed to get them on a plane to South Korea, baby. So for a girl from the impoverished country of North Korea, the amenities of South Korea felt absolutely magical.
Oh, it's big shocking, It's huge, different, so different, and so many lights.
Yeonmi and her mother both got jobs and saved money for Yeonmi to return to school. She even reunited with her sister, who they managed to find because she had also made it to South Korea.
정말 언니가 이 영상을 꼭 봤으면 좋겠어. 그리고 언니 많이 보고 싶고. 아빠처럼 죽을 때까지 언니 못 찾으면 엄마 볼 거야.
Her older sister Eunmi had in fact survived.
Your sister is here.
After 7 years of separation, it was an emotional reunion.
It was all uphill from here, thankfully. Unbeknownst to Yeonmi, she was right at the edge of becoming one of the most famous North Korean defectors in the world. She would go on to become a star, dubbed the Paris Hilton of North Korea. She would evolve from a soft-spoken, nervous girl who struggled with her English into a best-selling author, but not without the help of a guy whose name you're going to hear a lot going forward. Casey Latrigue. Casey, you sly dog. So I plan to look at this hopefully as fairly and unbiased as possible. I hope you all will hold me accountable to that. However, obviously, I am simply a girl on the internet and do not have access to any secret North Korean sources or anything. I'm not a North Korean expert. I've never been. I don't even plan to go. So let's look at a few clips together.
What the heck is missionaries? I never even knew the word religion, like Kim's religion. For we have really less loyalty for the regime, and we never really sincerely worshipped him. The first thing my mom told me as younger was, don't even whisper, because the birds and mice could hear you. Titanic, Cinderella, Snow White. Yeah, so I saw all these movies, and then I even saw like WWF, like wrestling. But in North Korea, there is no word for love. So my parents never told me that they loved me. When I was in North Korea, I wanted to be a like princess, waiting for the like prince riding a white horse. You know, that was my dream too.
Now, why would she lie? Why would she embellish? Why would she exaggerate? Bear with me for a second. Just say she did. Why would she? So for one, pay. Media appearances and speaking events would often hand over and pay thousands of dollars for stories like this. And the more gruesome, more detailed, more shocking, the more they'd pay. Not necessarily saying that's the case here, but that is a fact. Let's look at her rise to fame. It all began in South Korea. She made her debut on a show called Now On My Way to Meet You, which is a Korean show. It's like a South Korean variety show. Part talk show, part talent show, part beauty pageant. It was set in like a glitzy glam game show set. The guests are generally going to be young, pretty female North Korean defectors, dubbed by the producers as defector beauties. They would discuss their experiences in both North and South Korea. They would discuss topics including the North Korean lifestyle, products, and food. This is how Yeonmi Park got her name as the Paris Hilton of North Korea. The show was the first the world had ever heard of Yeonmi's story. But the show was controversial, at best, and it was criticized by a lot of defectors for its tendency to exaggerate a lot and falsify the negative aspects of life in the North to gain viewers for sensational reasons. Oddly, Yeonmi and her mother's account on this show was significantly less dramatic than her later retellings of the same stories, paling in comparison to the horrors she would later go on to describe, and more concerning, sometimes directly conflicting with those. Before we go further, I want to touch on this a little bit. Why does it matter, right, if she's totally honest or if she exaggerates or embellishes? Who cares, right? Why does it matter if she changes her message from freedom for North Korea to conservative cultural identity politics in America? Who cares, right? And well, it does matter because firstly, why does she have any reason to lie at all? The fact of being born and raised in North Korea is more than enough on its own. Why embellish? Why exaggerate? Well, media, right? In order to be successful, to captivate and shock audiences the way that she has, to touch hearts the way that she has, her stories have been altered a little bit to fit what the Western media craves. This is undeniable. This is a fact.
People were dying in these hospitals, and children who were starving would eat the rats. Mm-hmm. And then the children would die and the rats would eat the children. Yeah. Explain what...
Well, I mean, seeing that the bodies on the streets like everyday thing. It was
Where were the bodies? Like just laying around on the streets?
So they are floating in the rivers. And then they also, train stations somehow had a lot of dead bodies because North Korea is very cold. And there's a train waiting area. And North Korea has one train go to one distance like once a month. And like here it would take like 1 hour to go the other place. In North Korea it would take a month at least to go because there's no electricity. And sometimes people have to push the train.
They have to push the train.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shock, horror, crazy stuff, you know, and who can blame her for giving what she's asked for? Like, she would have likely learned quite quickly that she wouldn't find success or make a difference in the world unless she could captivate the Western world. This means appealing to the appetite of viewers in the West. This sensationalism, exaggerations, these have been criticized by more than a few North Korean defectors. Because if somebody with such a high profile twists their story to fit a narrative that we've come to expect from North Korean defectors, it could lead us to doubt other defectors. It could lead to miscommunications and misguided plans. So we need to have a full and honest picture of life in North Korea if we want to help those in the country. More so, and this is even more important, without a full, truthful picture, her motivations and her honesty as a whole is called into question. If lies are found anywhere, it could discredit her entire story and ultimately profoundly hurt her message. She is the most famous defector. So if it's found that she's a fraud or a grifter, well, good luck to any defectors after her. The West likely wouldn't be ready to listen and trust it like we should, like we did with Yeonmi, because she lied to us. So, does that make sense? Fool me once, right?
And recently, she has defected again. This time,
from Chicago.
New York City. I fled like Chicago because the day we had our first interview, I got robbed by black women. And it's okay.
Looking at her now, her increasingly outrageous positions, stories, and alliances are no longer doing a net good and no longer shine a light on the real problems of the North Korean people. She herself has mentioned that she has since changed her focus, moving on to issues in the good old red, white, and blue, baby, hell yeah. See, yeehaw. And I feel like I have good reason to be suspicious of anyone who moves to a country and engages in behavior that divides its citizens and makes them hate each other, right? Straight out of the 2016 Russian playbook. And hey, you should be too. And I want to make it clear, I'm not denying that North Korea is as horrible as it seems. Surely it is. But whether Yeonmi's experience was really hers is worth a second look, I think, right? I hadn't always thought so. But and I actually cried the first time I watched a video of her speaking. But after watching so many interviews where she discusses her newest focus, the horrors of American life.
The story of Yeonmi Park. She joins me now on why she fears there's not much time left for America to walk its way out of woke. Yeonmi, great to meet you in person.
Thank you for having me.
Escaping to China, finding your way to South Korea and then to America, and then you find yourself sitting in Columbia University. And what did you notice?
All day long, they talk about how to destroy America. They were dying to dismantle the system. Their problem is having too much food. And with zero gratitude, zero perspective.
Which I can say are obviously embellished, rehashed from others, and provably dishonest. And yes, I'll show you that proof in a minute. So at best, her perception is very untrustworthy. And in which case, we'd have to say the same then about her perception of North Korea. If her perception of America is so influenced by political motivations,
the same tactic that North Korean regime used to divide people is being used in America. People being punished for something they have not done, right? Like being a white is not a crime. Like you didn't choose to be white when you're born. Nobody chose that. In America, we have the hierarchy of victimhood, right?
In Colombia, the first class begins with introducing your pronouns. So instead of you trying to remember you as a person, I have to remember your pronoun.
If her perception of America is so influenced by political motivations, who's to say her perception of North Korea isn't the same? At best, her stories are extremely questionable and untrustworthy. At worst, she's intentionally or instructed to take the stances that she does in order to divide Americans, increase violence, increase division, hate, and fear. Why? For someone with such an important initial goal of saving lives of North Koreans, challenging a corrupt regime, and drawing attention to the most secretive, corrupt country in the world, she has become suspiciously prominent in extremely divisive, harmful political takes and gotten real loud on conservative podcasts, calling fellow Americans her enemies. Whether you agree with leftists or not, you cannot deny that this is cause for concern. You cannot deny how easily she sold her new book by claiming to align with one side of America and demonizing the other. This is never helpful. It does not foster discussion or change. It fosters hatred and fear and division, and I don't trust her coming into this country to do that. Sorry. She may think this video is trying to silence or censor her, and that's hardly the case. I respect her free speech, and I hope she will respect mine. She is free to say what she chooses, and I am free to say I don't trust her. She is not owed fame, no matter her history, and exercising the right of freedom of speech is both exactly what she is doing and exactly what I am doing. Now, remember those factors that I told you to keep in mind earlier? We can look at these discrepancies and attribute them to a variety of things. They could be lies, sure, or they could result of her trying to recall events that are likely extremely traumatic. And trauma can affect the accuracy of these memories when we attempt to recall them, when we store them, each part of the memory process. Trauma is a major factor in the way that memories are encoded and later retrieved in your brain. So our brains take these drastic efforts to protect us from childhood trauma like this, sometimes blocking out entire memories, sometimes changing them, sometimes they're clear as day and will never leave. To expect any trauma survivor's story to be perfect would be ridiculous and completely invalidate everything that trauma does to our brains, especially the developing brains of children, and Yeonmi is no exception. So on to the more important things, right?
And in America, I worked as a policy analyst. I was a radio talk show host, public speaker, did a number of interesting things.
You did incredible things.
All right, so I do want to thank my colleagues at the Atlas Network for inviting me, and also Kim Chung-ho at the Freedom Factory.
Now, Yeonmi also co-hosted a video podcast about North Korea for a for-profit libertarian organization in South Korea called the Freedom Factory. Her co-host is an American named Casey Latrigue. Casey Latrigue, my guy.
We're coming to you on JKJ TV in Seoul, South Korea. Yes, may I help you?
Am I invisible?
I know you're not, but this is the Casey Latrigue Show.
No, with Yeonmi Park.
Okay. I have a colleague in the studio. Her name is Yeonmi Park. And as she's trying to introduce herself, I do have a co-host.
And this was, again, early on, before she took to a national stage. This was while Casey was still, taking her under his wing. Her rise to fame was not a solo one.
Really? You met me during I couldn't speak at all.
Yeah, I just thought you were shy.
No.
I didn't know you got a job.
Yeah, I got a job now. I don't have to worry about the job.
Welcome. So you joined Freedom Factory as media fellow and other things, magazine, photo shoot, all over Twitter, all over Facebook.
Casey is interesting, to say the least.
But Yanmi.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so your English is incredible.
Oh, no, I'm flattered.
Oh, they can get a smart young lady taking over the world. You're an international star now.
He's quite self-obsessed and brazenly credits Yeonmi's success to himself. He's co-founder and co-president of Freedom Speakers International and has worked with numerous defectors. Casey is a bit of a character, so for sure.
Hey, I went to Harvard.
Oh, no,
so I'm a really smart guy.
He's affiliated with some extremely shady organizations, and he was her mentor. He co-hosted a show with her, he catapulted her into fame, and he takes credit for this. I'll show you the excerpt. Then he says in this other blog post, after we gave a speech together in February of 2014, I told Yeonmi I was sure she would become a spokesperson. I convinced the CEO of Freedom Factory to hire Yeonmi as a media fellow. So he's responsible for getting the job, and he likes to make sure that everybody knows he got her this job. Not to mention that he also said her age should be measured in dog years, meaning, and she was also extremely young at this point, regardless of how you measure her age. She was young anyway, so kind of sketch, kind of sleazy. My favorite photo with Yeonmi is before she gave her TEDx speech in mid-2014. She was nervous, so following in the Korean tradition of saying fighting, I bought her a pair of boxing gloves. When she was nervous before the speech, I encouraged her to punch me. Yeonmi and I signed a contract with Freedom Factory agreeing that I would be her supervisor and mentor. To avoid intruding on her studies, I convinced the Freedom Factory CEO to let her work part-time away from the office. Yeonmi was thankful, but made it clear she did not want an agent. So that is how we worked, with me as her supervisor and mentor. I knew she would be international one day, so I loved it when she called me boss. Is that not gross, y'all? Ugh. He's a senior fellow with what's called the Atlas Network. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I'm starting at the paragraph in red. He said, one day when we were preparing for a podcast, I remember looking around. Just about all the young South Korean females were taking selfies. In contrast, Yeonmi was snapping photos of new vocabulary words and terms. So she's not like other girls. And he makes sure that he's made sure to tell her that she is not like those other girls. She's a star. So, of course, I cannot completely discount that the TNKR had a role in her success. The TNKR is the Teach North Korean Refugee program that Casey started. I'm thrilled that Yeonmi says publicly that I changed her life. Okay. I don't know if this is from the same blog post or a different one. Eunmi seemed delighted with all the attention that Yeonmi was receiving. She had already decided that she wanted to become a teacher. Yeonmi's star began rising even more with book and even movie offers. Her 2014 speech at Dublin had gone viral. Even friends and relatives who barely paid attention to North Korea were asking me if I knew the little North Korean girl who had given that great speech. Little North Korean girl. Ugh, okay. Some were incredulous when I said that I had been her mentor for almost a year and that if they had been paying attention to my Facebook page, they would have already known about her. Now, don't worry, it does get worse. So, just brace yourself. Yeonmi was Casey's golden goose, his ticket to fame and to the history books. And you bet he sold to the highest bidder and patted himself on the back for inventing the concept of auctions. Now, if you're concerned that I'm being a little bit harsh on this guy, calling him arrogant, he calls himself arrogant, so let me just show you this. This is in an article he wrote called Humor My CIA Way. And he says, one of the North Korean refugees didn't give up. She had learned the word arrogant when we worked together on her book and later said it about me. Any English that I teach her becomes a boomerang flying back at my head, but I know how to duck. I told her that she is right. I am arrogant, and she should be thankful I am. Only a wonderful, arrogant man would take an unknown person like her and write a book with her. In this one, he mentions how they've never had a paid staffer to handle our public presence. And maybe you should. A North Korean refugee who had followed us in the media visited our office to apply. Doubtful that she could meet us, she was surprised that we were the ones to greet her and give her the orientation. She had assumed we would be out meeting business people and government officials instead of talking with North Korean refugees. She said she had studied with a larger organization, but she doesn't know if she met the top executives because she didn't even know who they were. There's nothing wrong with becoming a large organization, but life is about trade-offs. How much do leaders of large organizations engage with their customers and clients? How often do students contact the CEOs of large organizations late at night to ask for help or just talk about life? It happens to us, and we love it. So, if this doesn't just prove something to you, I mean, there's a reason that most refugee programs don't have their older men and leaders in the organization calling the young female refugees late at night and talking about personal life. There's a reason for that. And I think you know what that reason is, Casey. While Yeonmi was starring the Korean show On My Way to Meet You, she became an ambassador of the Teach North Korean Refugees project that Casey had launched in early 2013. 2014 marked the beginning of their show together, hosted by the two called Casey and Yeonmi. He said, "It will take an enthusiastic, energetic, and brave lady like her to co-host such a show." His show. Annoying. Yeonmi's rise to fame was, in Casey's words, his best work. She took the international stage funded by the Atlas Network, a libertarian and anti-communist think tank based in D.C. Funded largely by the Koch Brothers, powerful conservative billionaires, Yeonmi's mentor being a senior fellow of such a network is quite the reddest of flags. So Atlas's methods include using conservative and free market think tanks to defeat socialism. Atlas gives grants for new think tanks, provides courses on political management and public relations, sponsors networking events around the world, and in recent years has devoted special resources to prodding libertarians to influence public opinion through social media and online videos. Bingo. So the Atlas Network will identify, screen, and offer initial support to individuals and groups who want to create local think tanks. Their ideal intellectual entrepreneur is someone who communicates effectively with businessmen, academics, and the general public. By facilitating the establishment of these local think tanks, the Atlas Network increases both the reach and local credibility of their free market message, thereby having the most cost-effective impact, according to an Atlas report. Participants were told in a 2-hour workshop that building a larger supporter base depends on, quote, persuading by reason, but motivating by emotion. Bingo again, okay? Break it down. Just put 2 and 2 together. Seems sensible then that they would bet on Yeonmi.
Yanmi. Wow. Taking over the world. You're an international star now.
The vast amount of funding for the network's array of think tanks come from the Koch Brothers. Now, there was a documentary in 2012 that detailed all the shady shit of the Koch Brothers. They are villains. The billionaire Koch Brothers have been described as the poster boys of the 1%. It's also been alleged that a Koch brother-funded paper plant pollutes the air and water of a community in Arkansas. It's a small African-American community which has been infiltrated with a ton of cancer cases as a result of the paper plant funded by the Koch brothers. They also give millions of dollars to universities, which are given with the stipulation that you must hire some Koch brothers sympathetic professors. That's the rules. Otherwise, they're not going to fund you. So, talk about biases, right?
Koch cannot tell a university who to hire, he explains, but they are going to try to make sure through contractual terms and monitoring that people are hired to be consistent with, quote, donor intent. It's mainly to be able to say this esteemed professor from Florida State thinks there should be no regulation, so take that up to the hill. You see that? All the professors agree there should be no regulation of the pollution I'm putting in the air. There should be no regulation of the oil industry or any of the industries that I'm in. The second reason they do it is because it works so well in Congress. They bribe politicians to legal bribes, right? They say, okay, here's your donation. Now you do as we tell you to. Make sure that you follow donor intent.
David and Charles Koch are worth an estimated $82 billion in 2014 and believed that minimum wage creates a culture of dependency. For her to associate with such a group would seem to go against her core values, no? Or at least what her core values used to be before they got increasingly more involved in Yeonmi's life. Casey specifically, credited himself with her success. It's possible she faced a spiel similar to, look at all I've done for you. You would be nothing without me, and now you have to do what I ask. Similar to what the colleges faced when funded by the Koch Brothers. And that's not a far-fetched guess. Casey's influence and arrogance is evident in his writing, in his videos, and in general, his manipulation of Yeonmi may play a role, or maybe he didn't manipulate her, but he simply changed her mind, and we can't say for sure, can we? So how did this sweet, kind girl from North Korea go on to co-author a book with Jordan Peterson? How did she become the enemy of the woke?
Donor intent is very important in politics. And of course, here in this case, unfortunately, it's important at Florida State and in 163 other colleges.
Why did she take a world, an entire country of admirers and supporters, and chop them in half? Makes zero sense. And further, cutting her audience in half couldn't have helped North Koreans very much, right? It doesn't seem like she cares much about North Koreans at all. She's busy, I guess. Let's look at her perception of America. She's taken to podcasts and stages to deliver dire warnings that America is becoming another North Korea right before our eyes. And it's our own citizens doing it. We'd have to stop them. We have to do something. Her newest book is a summation of the same conservative talking points you will find absolutely anywhere else. Absolutely nothing unique added there, minus the random anecdote or comparison to North Korea here and there, just to scare you and keep on brand, right? The event that served as the catalyst for Yeonmi into full commitment to U.S. partisan politics happened in Chicago in 2020, during the height of the pandemic and in the wake of George Floyd protests across the cities. Yeonmi and her son, who was a baby at the time, and her nanny were walking down the shop-lined streets of the Windy City, and they stopped in front of a Saks Fifth Avenue. She first told of the traumatic events on the Joe Rogan podcast. She was standing outside the Saks Fifth Avenue store with her baby and her nanny, and she's robbed on the street by 3 black women.
So you got robbed by these 3 black women.
And I got punched.
You got punched and robbed.
Violence, yeah.
And so you called the police, and who?
I tried to call them, and they prevent me not calling the police.
Who was trying to tell you not to call the police?
It's all the people on the street,
that
on the
watched
Michigan
it?
Avenue. Yeah.
People that saw the crime?
Yeah. Because
they said you're racist for calling the police?
Yeah, and accusing these girls of being robbers, right?
How does that make you a racist by accusing them of being?
Because I'm not black and they are black. So calling black person a thief is a racist, even though when they are thief.
She told of the terrifying encounter, a woman punching her, taking her wallet out. Yeonmi then takes her phone, tries to call the police, but to her shock and her horror, bystanders started screaming at her, "Why are you doing this?" calling her a racist, as bystanders, who she identified as white people, gathered around the scene and allegedly prevented her from phoning any law enforcement.
So, of course, I got punched, I couldn't call the police, and later I called. Thankfully, these girls took my car to spend the money on the Saks, and then police got the footage of them.
Saks Fifth Avenue?
Yeah. In Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and then, of course, they are not going to prosecute these girls, right? There's so much crime in Chicago, they are not going to prosecute somebody who robs. And that's when I was thinking, this country lost it.
Then she establishes herself as the enemy of the woke. Okay, wowza, what a story. I finally managed to find the initial report of the robbery from 2020 before Yeonmi ever spoke publicly about the incident. And do you know how hard that was? Do you know how hard that was to track down? Anyway, this was before she was ever even named as being involved. The report simply names that it was a woman, her baby, and her nanny. And then it mentions the robbers, and then it's the same robber that's in the picture as from before, but the article's from way earlier, right after the robbery happened, because it is the official article, right? So it turns out that the woman who robbed Yeonmi is named Lucretia Harris. Now, the report conflicts a lot with Yeonmi's story. First, she claims she was robbed by 3 black women, but the police report and later arrest report are clear that it was 1 woman and 1 man. The report doesn't mention the first punching, but says that they had an interaction after which Yeonmi realized her purse was unbuttoned and her wallet was missing. She ran after the thieves, and so Yeonmi's running after them. The man was actually the one who allegedly punched her in the chest as she attempts to grab the thieves, and Harris, the woman, she knocks the phone out of Yeonmi's hand and it lands on the sidewalk. The victim, Yeonmi, but it just says in this report, it just says the victim, picked up her phone and didn't try to call the police in front of these bystanders as she claimed, but instead she began to film and record Lucretia, Harris, and the man that was with her. Then she went into a store and called 911. Lucretia was actually caught because of this cell phone video. So when was she called racist? When was she attempting to call the police? While she was filming a video? That doesn't make any sense. She was adamant that the bystanders interjected, calling her racist for calling the police, but she wasn't calling the police. She wasn't trying to call the police. She chased the robbers down and then filmed the rest of the event, the rest of the interaction. Everything else was on tape. Then she separately, went inside a store and called 911 from a store. So the story is at best sketchy. The details don't line up, things don't match up, and my main issue is this video recording she took. This video recording is what she gave to police, and this was the video recording that allowed them to catch Lucretia. And the reason they were arrested is because Yeonmi gave the video to the police, right? Later on, after she called them from a store. So, I mean, I guess this video is being recorded by Yeonmi, right, allegedly, at the same time that she's being screamed at and called racist, and because she's apparently trying to call 911 at the same time that she's recording a video. Why have we never seen this video? It seems like she would love to release a video like this, no? I mean, now that we know it exists, and she was not calling 911, rather she was filming. Now that we know this video exists, she can prove the story is true by simply releasing the video. However, I don't think she will, because I highly doubt that it's true, considering that the police report does not match her account of events at all. She also said in 2021 that they let the suspects go because she doesn't have any rights in this country because she's white.
Chicago, and then, of course, they are not going to prosecute these girls, right? There's so much crime in Chicago. They are not going to prosecute somebody who robs. And that's when I was thinking, this country lost it.
And this is hardly true. Lucretia was actually arrested only days later, and she was sentenced to 2 years in prison for this. This is a great example of Yeonmi doing two things, right? One, making an emotional appeal that she knows will garner sympathy from some and hate from others, based on a story that does not match police reports and court records. Second, she's honing in on an extremely hot topic issue, especially at that time in 2021, and all this time is like a peak of, George Floyd protests, racial tensions, and COVID tensions and all that. For someone from North Korea, someone whose own mother and father was subjected to the horrors of an unfair and unjust police control state, you'd think that she'd have a bit more compassion for the George Floyd situation in general. I mean, you'd think that she would relate. I mean, her father, for instance, he did break the law. He did. He did break the law for years. But did he deserve what he got? Absolutely not. No. So it's insane to me that she doesn't see how her experiences at the hands of reckless, violent law enforcement in North Korea wouldn't make her a bit more empathetic. Nevertheless, her robbery story has been greatly enhanced for dramatic effect, and I can prove that for a fact. How much else is the same way? That's my question. So as she describes how horrible America is and her efforts to push an agenda of her funding sources, imagine going to another country. I mean, seriously, for a second, okay. Imagine going to another country and comparing literally half of their population to Kim Jong-un. What is the matter with you? And it makes it impossibly difficult to believe that she could have experienced the hardships of living under said regime if she can compare half of America to said regime with a straight face. Don't get me wrong, I believe she was born and raised in North Korea. However, in my personal opinion, and I could be wrong, I believe she was actually quite wealthy by North Korean standards for more time than not, and that she experienced the life of someone wealthy and privileged in that country. And now she's pretending she experienced the horrors of North Korean poverty when she never did, similar to her victim complex she's so-called experiences in America, living an extremely wealthy and privileged life, again, might I add. So, similar to in nature how she, a millionaire, is suffering so horribly the injustices of America, meanwhile she's a millionaire, and she came to this country and was able to make millions of dollars, like, okay, yeah, it's so horrible for you. She is quite frankly in a much better position than 90% of Americans, and is in a position on a whole other plane in comparison to anyone from North Korea. And yet she's chosen to take her reach, her influence, her power, and divide Americans. Why? I ask you kindly not to be so naive. She's not on your side necessarily because she believes your message. And she's being actively funded. She's being likely manipulated. She was probably scooped up immediately upon her defection, extremely young and impressionable and scared, and then taken under the wing of Casey Latrigue and the Atlas Network and the Koch Brothers. So she was crafted by the hand of all these mini think tanks in the well-connected Atlas Network to spread a message. And can you really blame her? Assuming she did come from poverty in North Korea, she would be more than willing to go under a little bit of re-education in America, the American way, for the promise of safety and security. I mean, can you blame her? I can't blame her for that. That being said, I never would have called attention to any of this had she been doing good work. Who cares if she exaggerates or spins some details if she's actively doing a net good, like she used to be? And I wouldn't do that. However, I no longer believe that she's doing good work, and so I think it's time to find out why her experiences with starvation or and poverty, if her experience in North Korea was anything like her experience in America. She was a very wealthy position. She was an extremely privileged position in comparison to everyone around her. She walks past the homeless tents in the city that she lives in a penthouse in, and she says that she's oppressed. And is it the same when she was in North Korea? I mean, it would just make sense to assume so, right? I don't know. So that's all. That's this deep dive into Yeonmi Park. Let me know what you think. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to know your theories. I don't claim to know anything. This is all just speculation and my own research from the internet, and this is for educational purposes only. Thank you for your time. I do have a Patreon if you want to support me further. The link will be in the description, and all of my sources for this video as well will be in a Google Doc down in the description as well, so you can double check and fact check me all you want. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your time and for sticking with me this entire time. You are a wonderful person, a wonderful human, and I love you so much. Please subscribe for more videos like this. They take a long time to make, but I absolutely love them. I love making stuff like this. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day, and leave a comment. Like, subscribe, whatever.